everyone. Welcome to U.S. History. All right, let's go ahead and let's go over it. All right, number 1 on page 131. Who was the 4th president of the United States? So the 4th president was James Madison. Number 2, name the act which forbade trade with Great Britain and France but reopened American commerce with the rest of the world. That is the Non-Intercourse Act. Number 3, how did Napoleon trump the United States into open conflict with Great Britain? He reacted to the Macon Bill by reopening trade with the Americans. Number 4, name the Shoshone chief who led a great confederacy of tribes against the settlers in the West. So that is Tecumseh or Tecumseh is how you sometimes hear it pronounced, but Tecumseh is how a lot of book pronounces it, so I'll go off that pronunciation. Number 5, what governor of the Indian Territory led a force of troops to kidnap victory at the Battle of Tippecanoe? That is William Henry Harrison. You want to note that because he's going to be a future president, and that's going to play a big part as to why he is elected president. Number 6, list Madison's 4 reasons for declaring war on Great Britain. Alright, so the impressment of American seamen, the violation of American rights within American territorial waters, the violation of American neutral trade rights by the orders of council, and the stirring up of frontier Native Americans. Alright, so for your classwork, you want to study pages 110 through 122. So because of that, you'll want to copy down the bold terms and definitions. You want to copy them, I'm going to say one time, but spend as much time as you can for it to help you just to double check to make sure that you know all your terms and definitions, at least the bold ones. But then you also want to pay attention to anything that you've marked, that I've told you to mark. Make sure that you're going through those as well. So this should hopefully spend about 10 to 15 minutes studying and getting ready for the quiz today. So pages 110 through 122. You want to copy down bold terms and definitions, so just to help you kind of cement it. Now I'm going to review with you, but this will help you to get going, to help you kind of jumpstart your own memory, to make sure, okay, what's the term, what's the definition, what do I need to know? So that way, as you hear me review the terms, you already have an idea of, okay, I know what this is. So go ahead and pause the video, go ahead and do that. It only takes you about 10 to 15 minutes though, so don't spend forever on it. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. Alright, I'm assuming that you've paused it and now you've come back. So let's review and let's go over those sections for you. Alright, so page 110. So, who was the last king of France before the French Revolution? Louis XVI. Alright, what was the name for the fort in Paris that the the French revolutionaries stormed? The Bastille. What do we call that whole period of France where there was basically just mob rule or anarchy because they didn't have that biblical foundation? The Reign of Terror. Alright, what do we call it whenever American sailors are being forced into the British Navy? Impressed or impressment. Alright, who was sent to the British to negotiate a treaty with them to keep us out of the war with Great Britain? John Jay. What was the name for that treaty that kept us out of the war with Britain during this time period? The Jay Treaty. Good job. Alright, who was sent to Spain to negotiate with Spain to keep us out of conflict with Spain? Thomas Pinckney. What was the name for that treaty that settled the disputed boundary between Spanish West Florida and the United States? The Pinckney Treaty. Great job. Alright, who defeated the Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers? Anthony Wayne. Great. There were 3 states added in this time period. What were they? Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vermont. So make a note for it. What was the name for George Washington's last speech to the nation? That's the best way to put that. The farewell address. What 3 things did he warn against in his farewell address? Entangling alliances with foreign nations, diverse sectionalism, and party strife. Alright, what was the election where we had a president and a vice president elected from 2 different parties? The election of what year? 1796. Good job. Who was president? John Adams. Who became vice president? Thomas Jefferson. Perfect. Alright, so what do we call that whole affair? We sent some ambassadors over to France to meet with France, keep us out of war with France. French government wouldn't even meet with us, then they asked for a large bribe. So what do we call that whole affair? That whole event? The XYZ affair. Good job. Who ends up taking over France in this time period? So he overthrew the Directory. Napoleon Bonaparte. Good job. But there were four acts passed this time period that caused a lot of conflict. What was the one that said that it makes it a crime to make or publish false, scandalous, or malicious statements against the government? This is aimed directly at the Republican newspapers. The Sedition Act. So the other acts were against the people coming into the United States. What was the act that increased the time of naturalization for you to be considered a citizen from 5 to 14 years? Naturalization Act, so that one makes sense. What was the one that said you could order out of the country any aliens who leave dangerous to the public peace, respected of treason or conspiracy? Aliens Friends Act. What said that during a time of war, if you're subject to a foreign power, the president can also send you home or imprison you? So that is the Aliens Enemies Act. Alright, who said that these 4 acts were against the Constitution? There were 2 people in particular. One of them wrote to the Virginia legislature, and the other one wrote to the Kentucky legislature. Who wrote to the Virginia legislature? James Madison. Who wrote to the Kentucky legislature? Thomas Jefferson. Alright, so I think this is the first time we hear the idea of states' rights. Alright, what is the act where we had a tie between 2 candidates and it got thrown into the House of Representatives? What year or what election was that? It was the election of 1800. Good job. What amendment was passed saying, okay, we've had 2 events now where you've had the presidency, the electoral college not work properly. So now you have to throw 1 electoral vote for president, 1 electoral vote for vice president. What amendment was that? That is the 12th Amendment. Alright, what was the Judiciary Act? So it's the Judiciary Act of what? That called for the creation of 16 new federal judgeships, but it was also trying to appoint those federalist judges as quickly as possible. So this became known as the Midnight Judges or the Midnight Appointments, because they were trying to fill all those positions with federalist judges as quickly as they could. So the Judiciary Act of what? What's that year? 1801. Alright. So Thomas Jefferson, who was his Secretary of State? James Madison. Who was Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury? Secretary of the Treasury. Albert Gallatin. So make a note for that. Alright, who was his Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? John Marshall. Alright, what was the first court case where we had the court say something was unconstitutional? This was the first time that they used judicial review. Good job. Remember, it's Marbury versus Madison, and that is important. Alright, there were 2 people in France that were involved in buying the Louisiana Purchase. Name one. You have an ambassador or minister, technically, then we send over another person to go help them. Robert Livingston and James Monroe. How much did we end up paying for the Louisiana Purchase? Approximately $15 million. Alright. Was buying the Louisiana Purchase, was that a strict construction or a loose construction of the Constitution? Loose construction. Good job. What year did we buy the Louisiana Purchase? I guess what year did we have the Louisiana Purchase? 1803. Alright, who explored the northern portion of the Louisiana Purchase? Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Good job, both of them. Who explored the southern portion of the Louisiana Purchase? Zebulon Pike. What mountain did he discover in the Colorado Rockies? Pikes Peak. Perfect. Who was the lady, I guess, well, still a lady, Shoshone woman that traveled with Lewis and Clark? She was a great help to them. Sacagawea. As a side note, I forgot to mention this, I think yesterday or the day before. I sent your parents a link to a YouTube video talking about it. Normally I would show them in class, but trying to film a recording has not been working. So if you want to see it, be sure to ask them for the link. I sent the link, I think, yesterday. Alright, so who was the person that shot Alexander Hamilton, but then he was also involved in trying to create a Western Empire in the Louisiana Territory, in part of Mexico, New Mexico area. Alright, so that's Aaron Burr, so make a note for him. So he shot Alexander Hamilton, and he also was involved in the Burr conspiracy, or trying to create that empire. Alright, who is the best known hero of the Tripolitan War? Stephen Decatur. Good job. Alright, what was the name? Alright, what were the orders that Napoleon issued first, saying if you're an ally of France, you can't trade with Great Britain? Alright, that is the Berlin Decree. What was the orders or decrees given by Great Britain saying neutral ships have to stop at a British port first before trading with France? That's the Orders of Council. And then what was the decree or the, what was the decree that Napoleon issued in retaliation saying, okay, you can't trade with other nation, you can't trade with Great Britain if you are a neutral nation now. Alright, so that is the Milan Decrees. Alright, what was the name for our ship that was attacked without warning and it was a warship? This greatly angered the American people. Chesapeake. Good job. What was the act that basically cut off all trade with foreign nations as an American? This caused a lot of unrest, particularly in the Northeast area. The Embargo Act. Alright, so that's everything that you need to know. So if you realize now you want a few more minutes to study, go ahead and pause the video so you can study just a little bit longer, but be sure to come back. So if you want to pause, you can, but make sure that you're coming back for the quiz. Alright, so if you're watching this now for the quiz, make sure that you have a piece of paper and a pen. Put your book away, put everything else away so you can clear off space. So like you did in chemistry, if you were working in chemistry earlier, that you want to make sure that you have everything cleared off. So only a pen and a piece of paper. Textbook away, everything else put away, cell phone away, all of it. So that way you can just listen to me and write it out. Like how you normally do in class, just you're doing it at home instead. So everything else away, you only have about a piece of paper and a pen. That's it. Those are the only two things. So if you need to pause to go get something, you can. Those are the only two things that you need. Just a piece of paper and a pen, so you can write it. So I should write your name and date at the top. Write your name so I know who you are, so whenever I print off the quizzes later, I know whose is whose. So make sure that you write your name and the date at the top. You can just write U.S. History quiz. I'll work out the numbers later, but just U.S. History quiz. So I do that at the heading, and then label it 1 through 10. So again, don't watch this part of the video until you're ready to actually take your quiz. So if you need a moment really quick to go get something or to get organized or to study, pause it and then come back. But only watch this portion and only finish watching this lesson if you're ready to take the quiz. Alright, so number 1 then. Alright, so thinking back over it, what was the treaty between us and Great Britain that kept us out of the war at the start of the conflict with Europe with the French Revolution? What was the name for that treaty that was between us and Great Britain that kept us from going to war with Great Britain? What's the name for that treaty? Alright, number 2. Who was sent to Spain to have a treaty with Spain so that way it would keep us out of conflict with Spain during this time period? Who was the person sent to Spain to work out a treaty with them? Alright, number 3. What was the election year? So that's the election of what? This is the only time period in history where we have an elected president and an elected vice president from 2 different parties. So, what election is that? Whenever you have a president and a vice president elected from 2 different parties, what election is that? So, the election of what? Alright, number 4. What do we call the event whenever we tried to keep out of war with France at this time period? We sent over our ambassadors. The French government wouldn't meet with us, and they said we need to pay them a large bribe among other outrageous demands. What do we call that whole event between us and France? So what do we call that event? Whenever we sent our people over to negotiate, the French government wouldn't negotiate with us, and they said that they wanted us to pay them a large bribe. What do we call that whole event? Alright, number 5. What number amendment was it whenever we said, okay, you're going to cast 1 electoral vote for president, 1 electoral vote for vice president? What amendment is that? Alright, number 6. The Judiciary Act of what? So what year said that, okay, you're going to create 16 new federal judgeships, but since they were trying to fill them with the Federalist judges as fast as they could before Thomas Jefferson became president, they were referred to as the Midnight Judges or the Midnight Appointments. So what Judiciary Act was that? So it was the Judiciary Act of what year? When it called for the creation of 16 new federal judgeships, but these judgeships or these midnight appointments, that's what they were known as. Those are known as the Midnight Judges or the Midnight Appointments. So what year? Judiciary Act of what year? Alright, number 7. What is the court case? And it doesn't matter who's first and who's second. So what is the court case? This is the first time that the Supreme Court used judicial review or to declare something unconstitutional. What is that court case? What's the court case? This is the first time we had the Supreme Court declare something unconstitutional. Alright, number 8. So, whenever the Louisiana Purchase was made, is this an example of a strict construction of the Constitution or a loose construction of the Constitution? You have a 50-50 shot, so just pick one. Just either write strict construction or loose construction, either one. So, the Louisiana Purchase, is that an example of strict construction or loose construction of the Constitution? Number 9, what year was the Louisiana Purchase made? What year was the Louisiana Purchase made? Then lastly, number 10, what 2 men explored the Louisiana Purchase in the northern section? So I need both their names. So what 2 men explored the northern portion of the Louisiana Purchase? Alright, so if you need something repeated, rewind back to that particular section on the quiz, but make sure though that you're not going too far to hit the review. So be careful as you're going through it. But if you need something repeated, just rewind back just a little bit. Once you take the quiz, go ahead and put it off to the side, so that way you won't forget, so that way you can give it to your mom or dad, whoever is emailing these in for you. So make sure that you give it to them later and that you ask them to email it in for you. So don't forget, you can go ahead and put that off to the side and worry about that later. Alright, go ahead and pick up your textbook. Turn over to page 124. This is where the last things we talked about. So we already talked about the Napoleon War. The best known hero of the Napoleon War was who? As a side note, Stephen Decatur. So make a note of him. All right, we talked about the Chesapeake. I didn't show this picture yesterday. So this is a drawing of the Chesapeake and the Leopard. So this isn't like an actual photograph. This is a drawing of it to help represent it. Now remember, our ship was fired upon. We weren't ready for battle. We thought that we were just meeting with the Leopard, and it was once the Leopard pulled up to us and they told us they wanted to check for deserters. That's whenever the Chesapeake said, no, we're a warship. We're part of the Navy. We don't have any deserters. That's whenever the Leopard fired onto us, killed some of our people, wounded a lot of others, took away 4 people. Only one of them even turned out to be British. And so because of that, this angered the American people greatly. Now, Jefferson knew he couldn't go to war against Great Britain right now for it, because he understood while he was trying to save the government money, he had decreased the budgets over how much he spent in the military so much that we were not prepared to go to war. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but we were not prepared to go to war. Even with the War of 1812, we were vastly understaffed, I guess is a good word to put it, and underfinanced. Thankfully, Great Britain was so busy with Napoleon that they didn't bother fighting against us at the start of the war. Later on, we get it together. That's the reason with the Chesapeake affair, why it angered so many people. Now, Thomas Jefferson decided, okay, if I can't use military force, I'll use money instead. Since England and France both need to trade with us, if I cut off all shipping with them, then one of them will have to work with us. He overestimated how long it would take for Britain and France to have to work to us, because they can trade with other nations around them. We can now no longer trade with any other nation. So it almost caused bankruptcy in the United States of our economy. Several people did end up going bankrupt. Several people lost their income. And so because of that, this angered particularly the Northeast. Because remember, that one is the section of the country that mainly does shipping and ship trading. In the South, they did do it as well, but it was more agricultural based. So in the North in particular, it affected them. Alright, that's where we left off. Now, James Madison, make a note of him, that he is the 4th president of the United States. So make a note of him. He was the Republican candidate, and he defeated the Federalist candidate, Charles C. Pinckney. So make a note that Charles C. Pinckney was the Federalist candidate, but James Madison won. So make a note for him. Alright, so Congress repealed the Embargo Act because they said it's not working, this is not a good idea, we don't like this. So we need to get rid of that. So they adopted the Non-Intercourse Act instead. This forbade trade with Great Britain and France, but said, okay, we can trade with the rest of the world. We don't want to trade with Britain and France because we're getting caught in the crossfires of their conflict, but we can trade with other nations of the world. Now, unfortunately, we were still getting attacked by Britain and France, so they said, okay, we're going to issue the Macon Bill as well. This bill, the wording of it is important, so look at it on your textbook on page 125. This bill provided for the reopening of trade with all nations, stating that if Great Britain or France would cease to violate the neutral currents of the United States, America would reinstitute a no-trade policy against the other. So they're saying, okay, that we will trade with all nations, but if Britain or France will promise to leave our ships alone, we will trade with them and then not trade with the other nations. They were hoping that, oh, Britain and France will both say, oh, we don't want this anymore. They were hoping either Britain or France would say, oh, okay, we want to instigate a no-trade policy against the other nations, so we will trade with you and we won't attack your ships anymore. Now, Napoleon realized, based on the wording of that bill that he knew, I'm not going to use this to spark conflict between Great Britain and the American nation, the United States of America. So he decided that he would use this to kind of cause conflict between us. Because remember, he was already in conflict against Great Britain, so he thought that Great Britain would lose to him if Great Britain started fighting us at the same time. So he was being actually very, very, very smart. Look at what he said, just because the wording again is getting very, very particular in this section. He said that His Imperial Majesty, talking about himself, loves the Americans, and he claimed that France was revoking the Berlin and the Milan decrees on the condition that either Great Britain will renounce her orders in council or America will revert to a no-trade policy. Now, can we tell Britain what to do? No, we can't do that at all. So, Napoleon is saying, we love the Americans, we'll trade with you, we won't attack your ships anymore, as long as you get Britain to pull back their pull back their councils of orders, or you instigate a no-trade policy against them. So he knew, based on what we had said in the Macon Bill, that he could basically cause us to go to conflict against Great Britain. Now, President Madison realized what Napoleon had done, and so he realized that Napoleon had found a loophole and was trying to get us to go to war against Great Britain. But President Madison said, we've changed our minds so much in this era, we've had so many treaties with other nations trying to keep out of this war, that it seems like we're kind of just getting stuck and getting sucked into it. We're going to look too wishy-washy if we back out over what we say. So we might not have to go to war with Great Britain, but we are going to have to follow through and issue a no-trade policy against Great Britain. Go to the next page. So that's what he was saying. And okay, he sent a message to Great Britain saying, okay, if you do not pull back or renounce your orders of council, then we will have no choice but to instigate a no-trade policy with you. Unfortunately, we also realized that Napoleon had lied, that Napoleon was still attacking our own ships, but President Madison realized we look too wishy-washy if we back out of it. It looks like we change our minds too much, and the other nations of Europe won't respect us. We're a young nation, we're a weaker nation. If we change our mind and don't follow through with what we say, the other nations of Europe won't respect us, so we have to follow through with what we say. So, because of this, Congress cut off all trade with Great Britain in March of 1811, so that's what Napoleon wanted us to do. We weren't at full war with Great Britain, but it was causing conflict between us and Great Britain, because now we're no longer trading with Great Britain, so it's causing that strife between us. Now, Madison understood that the American people were getting fed up with it. Now, Britain already did not really respect us as a nation, and so he understood that American people felt like that it was their honor at stake. And so because of that, the American people understood we need to stick by with what we say. We can't look wishy-washy, particularly to the European nations. A growing number of Americans were saying we just need to hurry up and go to war. And in particular, your book talks about two people that you'll want to know. This is a new group of statesmen. Now keep in mind, we're talking about our founding fathers like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. These people are starting to die off by this point in history. So you're having a new generation, a younger generation that has grown up in America. And they are more patriotic, you would say, than the previous generation, because this is the country that they grew up in. Now, some of them were alive during the War for Independence, so they remember the conflict. But these people, they were very, very patriotic. A lot of them have grown up in the frontier in the western states, like Kentucky, so they were very independent-minded. So, your book points out that these men of the rural American West and South were young, fearless, patriotic, and they wanted America to be seen as a great nation on equal footing as Great Britain and France and Spain. Two people in particular were Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. Make a note for these two people. You're going to see them for the next several chapters of your history book, because these two gentlemen in particular, you get elected to the House of Representatives or the Senate over and over and over again, just because they are very outspoken and want to believe, and it's kind of like Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, where these two gentlemen don't get along that well, so they're typically the outspoken for two different views. Now, in this particular time period, both of them were clamoring for war, but you're going to see later on that they get more opinionated and their opinions are different, so they're more of against each other. But for right now, they have the same idea, but they say, no, it's American honor at stake. We need to go to war and defend our country, and we need to defend our honor to other nations. They were known as the War Hawks because they wanted to go to war. So make a note for them. So Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, both those two gentlemen, you're going to see them over and over again, so you might as well learn them now. So Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, they're known as the War Hawks because they wanted to go to war with Great Britain during this era. They're also having several problems with our Native Americans as well. Now, your book points out that the previous presidents, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, they were trying to keep peace with the Native Americans, and they encouraged the American settlers, as you go west, be respectful. Now, I remember a lot of pieces of the Indians, they didn't own the land, the same idea as a lot of the white Europeans viewed it. For a lot of the Native Americans, they didn't really believe you could buy land and that land property was yours. And so it was a little bit different than how Europeans viewed it as owning the land and buying the land. The Indians viewed it more kind of like renting, so there was that natural disagreement between the European settlers and the Native Americans. Plus, the Native Americans are starting to get a little bit tired of being pushed farther and farther and farther back. Now, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson have tried to encourage peaceful relationships and to work with the Indians, but there's only so much that they can do, and unfortunately a lot of people, as they moved west, took advantage of the Indians and weren't honest with the Indians as well for it. Alright, so your book talks about one particular kind of event that happened with the Shoshone Indians. So there was a Shoshone medicine man, and there was his brother that was the chief of the tribe. So Shoshone medicine man, he was known as the prophet. He did have an Indian name, but it's hard to pronounce. So your book just gives kind of the kind of the nickname that he was known for the prophet. That his brother, Shoshone chief, he wanted to try to get this confederacy of a lot of the Native American tribes together to drive out the Western Europeans coming into the area. Make a note of his name. So Tecumseh is how your book pronounces it. Tecumseh is another way of pronouncing it. I hear both. Either one is fine, but Tecumseh is how your book gives it. So we'll just pronounce it that way. So he was trying to say we're going to have a confederacy, a group of Indians, and try to fight or push back the Western settlers moving into our territory. Now, William Henry Harrison, he was the governor of the Indiana Territory, so he said, I'm going to go and fight the Indians and drive them out of our section. He understood that if you get that confederacy of Indians, that they would be hard to drive them and push them out of the territory later. So he said, nope, we're going to take the initiative, we're going to go ahead and push them back. Now, there's a couple of different disputes over what actually happened at this event. Apparently, Tecumseh was out meeting the other Indians, and so he was not present at the Indian settlement. Your book doesn't give the name of the Indian settlement, but it was the temporary kind of capital city for the Native Americans with the confederacy that they were trying to build. It wasn't an official capital, but it was the idea of that was a major city, a major settlement where they were staying. So William Henry Harrison's thinking, with European tactics and American tactics, go capture the capital city, and the confederacy is done. So that was kind of the logic behind it. So William Henry Harrison, he set out with a force of troops to destroy the Native American settlement, or that kind of capital city. Now, whenever he found out that Tecumseh was not there, he was supposed to have kind of like a peace talk with the prophet who was there, saying, okay, your leader's not here, we're going to have a parley or kind of have a peace talk because I don't want to attack you while your general's not here, while your leader's not here. So that's what one view of it is. There is some discrepancy over what actually happened, but the main thing was William Henry Harrison pulled back and he and his troops camped for the night. Since that they thought that it was basically a peaceful ceasefire, they didn't think that they had to defend themselves that well. Well, the prophet decided that he would do a surprise attack in the early morning hours the next day. So whether or not it was an actual ceasefire, the disputes are kind of up there in history to decide who actually said what. But the important thing was that William Henry Harrison had pulled back, and the prophet decided with his troops that he would lead them to go attack William Henry Harrison. Now, both sides fought very bravely. Your book points that out as well. And this is a painting of it. This isn't like an actual photo, it's a painting done of it. But it's just one of them, that both sides fought valiantly. But keep in mind that there was a dispute over who owned the territory, so it's not necessarily the idea of the good guys versus the bad guys, because unfortunately, the Indians are getting pushed farther and farther and back, but unfortunately the Indians are also attacking the white European settlers, so there's conflict on both sides of it. But so both sides fought valiantly, and William Henry Harrison ended up winning this battle. So this is the Battle of Tippecanoe. So your book points out that this was the battle that kind of crushed the Confederacy even before it got started. So this was basically it. Now, individual tribes warred against the United States, and since the Native Americans were very good fighters and very tactful fighters, even a small group of Indians was a lot of cases enough to cause significant damage. So don't think that the Indians were just overpowered. They fought very bravely, and your book points out as well that they made a daring raid. So it's more of the two different ideas over who owns the land, with the idea of the Indians and the white European settlers. So again, There's lots of conflict in this time period, and unfortunately, we probably could have handled it with the Indians better, but you're gonna see throughout history that unfortunately the Indians get taken advantage of them a lot. Just make note though, for Battle of Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison, he won this battle because they were attacked by the Shoshone tribe. And this particular battle wins him fame, and we're gonna talk about later on how this is a major event that allows him to kind of campaign to become president. Make a note though, William Henry Harrison, that he defended his people against Indian attacks, and he drove out the Indians from this section of the Indiana Territory, opening it up for more settlers to come into it. Your book also points out the American frontiersmen thought that the British and the British and Canada and the Spanish in West Florida were stirring up the Indians. So even though they knew, okay, we're having conflict with the Native Americans, we think it's the British stirring up trouble with them as well. So rather than just fighting the Native Americans and trying to work it out peaceably, it seems like that the British and the Spanish are instigating problems with them. So we want them to stop instigating trouble with the Native Americans. We want to try to live peaceably as best we can, but at the same time, the Europeans are moving into their territory. So it's one of those to where if both sides could have respected each other and talked to each other more, but unfortunately, this is just what happened in history. So we just learn about it, so that way we don't do it, so that way things like this hopefully don't happen in the future. That was one of the reasons, though, why the United States ends up going to war with Great Britain. Your book points out with the 4 reasons that Madison issued to declare war against Great Britain. Madison realized, okay, we need to do something against Great Britain. There are several conflicts and several things that they are doing that is causing us to go into conflict. The war, for some parts of the nation, they really wanted it. Now, in the Northeast in particular, they did not want to go to war against Great Britain, but there were several other parts of the United States that wanted it. So there were 4 major reasons that he said to Congress, here's the reasons I'm giving as to why we need to go to war with Great Britain. So the impressment of American seamen, so because people are being taken basically captive, that yes, we need that is a major violation. You should not be doing that. You should not be kidnapping our people. So that's a major violation, and that's a major reason to go to war. The violation of Americans' neutral shipping rights by the orders of council. So they're saying you are interfering with our trade. If we should be allowed to trade with whatever nation we want, and your orders of council are interfering with that. The violation of Americans' neutral trade rights. Oops, I already said that one. The violation of American rights in American territorial waters, like with the Chesapeake. And then fourthly, the stirring up of the frontier Native Americans. So all those 4 reasons, he said, okay, here's 4 reasons why we want to go to war against Great Britain. Now officially Congress has to declare war. The president just can't declare war on another nation. That's because he had to appeal to Congress and ask Congress to declare war, because he as the president just could not decide that. Now this did pass Congress. Now there were several people that opposed it. In the Northeast in particular, there's northern states, because they were mainly a trading section of the United States. They did not want to go to war against Great Britain because that would interfere with their trade and with their shipping. But the rest of the country in the South and the West, they were for it. So just make note of the Northeastern congressmen, they were adamantly opposed to war with Great Britain. They did not want it. They didn't like it. They actually do several things later on. We'll talk about how they kind of directly hinder it in some cases. And then there's actually talks of secession of pulling out of the whole country just because they just don't like it. They do not want this war. They didn't think that there was good reasons to go to war, and so because of that, they do not want to help as much as they can. Alright, your book points out that right after war was declared, though, we do have the presidential election. Madison is elected again. That typically happens whenever you have a president at the start of a war. He is elected again during the war, just because people, they don't want to have a new leader or a new commander-in-chief of the military during active conflict. So because of that, that typically happens. So you're going to see it a couple times in history. So a few months after the war, we have the presidential election. Madison won. So just make a note for that. Alright, because of the quiz, I'm going to go ahead and stop there for it, so that way you had enough time to study and take the quiz, so I don't want to go over too much for it. So, your homework for tonight, read pages 127, basically finish that page, but page 127 through page 131, 127 through 131. Answer questions 7 through 14 on page 131. So we're going to finish up the chapter, and then we will be done. So page 131, 7 through 12. Make a note of that. Read paging 127 through 131. Answer on page 131, 7 through 12. Don't forget, your Federalist essay paper is due Monday. As a side note, just so everyone's clear, just for your heading, just have Federalist Essay. So some of you are doing Federalist Essay number 10, some of you are doing Federalist Essay number 51. This is always consistent. Your heading at the top of the page will just be Federalist Essay. So that'll help me out as I'm grading them. So straight up, just Federalist Essay at the top. That'll just be your heading. Alright, so we'll go ahead and we'll stop there. Hope you have a great weekend. Don't forget, student